A devastating flood, a cast of strange and mythical creatures, and you, a young weaver that must fight off corruption, restore balance to the world, and most importantly, find your missing mother. My name is Kodiak, this is Legacy Gaming, and this is our review of South of Midnight after beating the game and putting a stop to the King of Nightmares. So here's the headline. The most impressive thing about South of Midnight is the enchanting Southern Gothic world you explore, accompanied by the occasional mythical creature that keeps you engaged with the story. The game's got competent platforming with a few neat ideas, but it's the combat that drags the experience down with monotonous, repetitive encounters that never feel satisfying. Overall though, I enjoyed the 26 hours I put into the game, mainly because of the story, setting, and interesting characters. For those that might not know much about this game, let's start at the beginning. South of Midnight is a single-player narrative adventure game. You play as Hazel, a teenager who's thrust into chaos from the very first moments of the game when a flood sweeps away her family home with her mother still inside. Your early adventures take you to a strange mansion, owned by your aloof grandmother, Bunny, and it's there where you obtain the power of a weaver. Unlike your traditional hero-centric games where you use a sword or a gun, South of Midnight is rooted in Southern folklore, and every aspect of the game taps into that in some way. Weavers can see strands of magic and can manipulate them using hooks, which are the weapons in this game. Being a weaver grants Hazel a number of important powers like the ability to double jump, dash and glide across gaps, zip line to magical anchor points, and run on walls. All of those skills are essential because for a vast majority of the game, you're exploring the various levels which are filled with all sorts of environmental obstacles you have to navigate. All in all, I think the platforming is one of the stronger aspects of South of Midnight, and that's because the world of Prospero is interesting to explore. The Deep South is not a location we often see in video games, and Compulsion really nails the aesthetic throughout the entire course of the game. However, what doesn't really change throughout the game is the platforming itself, and after just a couple of chapters, you wind up doing all of the same things, just in different locations. What I would have loved to see was the Compulsion team lean into environmental puzzles. They're practically non-existent in the game, which is a huge shame because I could see them working incredibly well based on the world design and the character mechanics that the team already created. Instead, you wind up doing more traditional platforming, running, jumping, and climbing to reach your destination. There is a fun mechanic where you can summon or throw your magical childhood doll, Crouton, and then control it, often leading you into animal dens or small underground areas. It's different, but does ultimately play out the same way with some basic platforming. The game would have been elevated to another level if there were some real puzzles built into each of the chapters because quite honestly, the rest of the foundation was there to support it. That being said, the character movement and platforming that was in the game was perfectly fine, and like I said, was made better because of the world itself. Each chapter plays out in a similar way, with Hazel exploring a new part of the world, which is often tied to a specific new character in the story. That character is the key to getting you closer to finding your mom, but because of the stigma that is spread to the area, you first have to clear out the corruption. If 50% of the game is focused on exploration, traversal, and platforming, the other 50% is focused on combat. Now, I have no actual issue with the combat itself, which is fine for an adventure game. It's almost entirely melee focused, with Hazel having an array of direct and some indirect abilities that allow her to deal with the half dozen or so types of stigma. My issue is that the combat is exactly the same throughout the entire game. In each area, you need to clear 3 or 4 different stigma zones, which are just small arenas that you physically enter. Then, within each zone, a half dozen enemies spawn across 2 waves. Using your Weaver magic, you beat the enemies to a pulp, unravel the core at the center of the zone, and then a memory plays out, granting you 1 charge for your magic bottle that you'll eventually use to solve the main objective of the area. This exact sequence repeats itself each chapter until the very end of the game, and that drags the entire experience down. It's the reason why I want more environmental puzzles, because the developers could have used them to vary the way you progress through the game. We often talk about formulaic design in our reviews, especially when it comes to an open world game. But here, a narrative-driven adventure game falls right into that same trap of recreating the same experience time and time again without deviation or evolution of the core idea. Yes, there are a few variations of stigma that get added into the game every couple of chapters, and the upgrade system does allow you to enhance your core abilities, making them more potent, but at the end of the day, combat is about as one-dimensional as it gets, and that's a huge shame because outside of that, I really did enjoy the game. There are also a couple of interesting boss fights, and while I'm only showing you the first one, I will say these are also hit and miss. Mechanically, they're fine, with bosses that use clearly telegraphed attacks that have you reacting within a pretty tight window. The issue again is the formulaic nature of these fights. Each boss has a main phase and then an alternate phase, and while that's fine, you end up having to do the same sequence 3 different times within each boss fight, and that cheapens the experience. Instead of having 3 distinctly different phases that get progressively more challenging with new mechanics, you simply have to master 2 and then alternate. It's a shame because the bosses are actually really cool from an aesthetic and lore perspective, but the fights themselves are lacking. Combat is just a means to an end, and if you can push through those sections, you get into what makes South of Midnight so enjoyable, the storytelling that takes place within each chapter. One of the first memorable encounters is with a mythical catfish, a character you might have seen in the game's trailers. He's a tantalizing figure that ends up being with Hazel throughout the entire game, and let me just say, the writing and voice acting was just superb.
Use that pattern to fix that big old tangle.
No. You know how the water's starting to smell like pig shit? Well, I'm breathing that.
In my opinion, these mythical creatures honestly make the game, and while they're not all friendly, they certainly add a lot of charm to the story, and they're all rooted in American folklore, which I found fascinating. These are all creatures and locations I'm not that familiar with, which means it's all incredibly new as I'm learning about them for the first time in this fantasy setting. Another memorable character you meet later in the game is Rue, and while I of course won't spoil his role in the story, I just found everything about him to be fascinating, from his character design to his voice acting.
Take this and go find your mama. I'll just ask you for a favor later. I like you, Hazel Flood. You got vim and vigor, a certain je ne sais quoi. Unfortunately, you will never be fast enough to defeat him.
There are other mythical creatures as well, and while I'd love to show them all off, I won't, because they're genuinely the best part of the game, and the way they're used within each environment really helps define each chapter. Each chapter is its own micro-story, and as you might expect, they're each set in a different location. This is another strong aspect of the game because there are more than a few standout spots that I truly enjoyed exploring. The first one that comes to mind is a small makeshift city inside a mountain. I won't say more on this because it's tied to a huge part of the story, but it's wicked cool. Another location that stands out is a massive clock tower that you have to ascend before reaching the final part of an area. It's a huge platforming puzzle and actually reminds me of a similar set piece from one of my favorite games, It Takes Two. There's also a horrifying moment when I had to walk through an entire slaughterhouse filled with dead pigs. The game doesn't dip into dark gothic roots too often, this is just one of a couple moments, but it was bleak. Finally, there's this really cool location towards the end of the game that's almost like a fractured dream version of Bourbon Street, which at this point was such a stark contrast from the rest of the game. Those are just 4 locations that stand out in my mind, but honestly, there are a lot of other moments I could talk about. Compulsion does a really great job making each of the areas feel unique, with at least one major set piece that really captures your imagination and in some cases, tugs at your heartstrings. Each part of the journey is made better by South of Midnight's incredible soundtrack, and while I normally play games without the music, mainly so I can record clean gameplay audio, I refuse to do that with this game. Olivier de Rivière is the brilliant mind behind the music, and you might know his works from other games, most notably A Plague Tale. The man just understands how games and music should come together and the interplay that makes it so critical for the person actually playing the game to be immersed. Because of the game's setting, he gets to tap into something we almost never hear in video games, deep, soulful blues, and he absolutely crushes it. I give South of Midnight a lot of credit for trying to be a different type of game, and if you were looking for some sort of comparison, I'd say it's closest to something like Psychonauts. It's not nearly as clever, but there are moments when the game is thought-provoking, and despite me being a systems-first kind of guy, I actually put that away and just enjoyed South of Midnight for what it is, a story-first game. Hazel isn't a protagonist that just fits into the hero mold, and in fact, it takes until the final beat of the game for her to really reach that pinnacle. Throughout the game, her desire to find her mom compels her to keep forging ahead, but throughout each chapter, you see her character change as she comes to terms with what it means to be a weaver and uncover the past of some of the people closest to her. Do I think South of Midnight is a smashing success? No, it sadly misses the mark in a few key areas, but for a game that will cost $40 that I sank 26 hours into, I walked away happy that Compulsion took the risk to create a game like this, once again bucking the norm and trying to stand out in a sea of video game parody. Friends, I hope you enjoyed our review of South of Midnight. If you have any questions about the game, leave us a comment down below, and as always, make sure to drop a like on the video and consider subscribing for more Day 1 reviews in your feed. My name is Kodiak, and from everyone here at Legacy Gaming, thanks for watching, and play on.